Here. Thanks for joining us as we pair on some things. I'm bringing my most recent work to you all, which I'm excited to pair. Hopefully, hopefully it's fun, and hopefully it is making sense, because it's dealing with our re-implementation of the Web IDE, not re-implementation, but it's just, yeah, I guess it is re-implementation of, is it a remaster? Is that what they would call it in video games land? It's not a remaster, because it's more than that. It's a remake. It's a remake of the Web IDE using VS Code as the main engine. And so that's really exciting. But there's parts that we get to touch, namely creating an in-memory file system, creating in-memory source control. And so I have gone down this route and discovered an issue with our existing file system implementation. So thankfully, the third-party module that we were using isn't doing a whole lot. And so we're just going to copy over that module and implement it ourselves, potentially in a nicer way. Because there was the code that third party was using was a little dated, had callbacks everywhere. So we can make, I know my internet's a little laggy. We can make things nicer by using promises and hopefully not run into issues. So let me share my screen. Hopefully the internet stops being a little wonky. Tell me if you're still experiencing lag issues. Are we good right now?
Yeah, good? Every so often it has to play catch up, but I can understand what you're saying, so that's good.
Okay, all right, let's try it out. So there's an interesting situation here with the VS Code Web IDE. And this path that we've gone down to implement both in-memory file system and keeping track of changes. And it's not just keeping track of changes. We want to be able to calculate changes at any time. We want to get a correct calculation of what has actually changed since when you first opened this up. And we came across this really neat implementation on a BrowserFS, is short for browser file system. Is a commonly used NPM package to create a browser-based implementation of Node's file system API. They have a lot of different, though, like file systems. Like they provide an in-memory file system. They provide a file system that can communicate over different protocols or whatever. But they also provide this one file system called OverlayFS, or overlay file system. And I hadn't heard of this before, but apparently this is somewhat of a this isn't BrowserFS specific thing. Like overlay file systems is somewhat of a somewhat normal occurrence out in the wild. But the way it works is you have one file system interface that is implemented by two file systems. One is your base readable file system, which is like your starting point and where we'll read things from. And then any written change, we cannot touch the read-only file system. Those get changed on top of the writable file system. And so whenever you're wanting to read, you first check the writable file system, because that's your most latest up-to-date thing. And then we trickle down and fall through to the readable file system. And if something doesn't exist in either of them, then it doesn't exist. Does that algorithm or implementation or strategy make sense?
Just about. It sounds quite low level, if that makes sense. Like one of those things where I guess I was maybe hoping or expecting that you had a nice abstraction or whatever it's called, and someone had done the hard work for you.
So yeah, so OverlayFS, we did have an abstraction. Like this was implemented by the third-party library, but there's bugs with it. And unfortunately, this library also is not the most maintained. That's an understatement.
So, doing my duty, have we reached out to sort of see if it's something that we can sort of step up and not exactly take ownership of,
Well, that would be
but
cool. I don't know. So it is interesting to see like how this is referenced a lot in the wild. I think part of it, part of the reason why this gets referenced a lot is because it's a pretty mature and sophisticated implementation of Node's file system API, which is nice.
Mhm.
The things that is not nice is that no, there's not a lot of activity. You can see the last commit was a while ago. So but then like one could question of, well, is there not a lot of activity because is there not a lot of activity because hey, we implemented the API, we're done? Or is there not a lot of activity because I don't know, or maybe there is more stuff to do? I clearly ran into some bugs. We're only using like a subset of this library, so like maybe down the road we don't even need it. Right now we're not, we're trying to push out our first iteration. We have a timeline that we're trying to push this first iteration for, so we're not super eager on changing a lot of things. So definitely somewhat eventually maybe we'll move away from BrowserFS is a question that we'll be considering. Right now we're not considering it because we want to get the first iteration out. But uh I did, we have been left with the option of, rather than building on top of what's already there, it's actually going to be a lot easier for us to just re-implement this because what's already there is doing things in somewhat of a legacy way where we can use promises and don't have to worry about being in a callback hell and all sorts of gnarly things like that. So really the situation is there's a whole bunch of methods like rename and readdir and makedir that we just have to implement using this algorithm. That's the situation. Does that sound fun? I've already done
Interesting for
a
sure.
number of these. We also already have some tests for this. So we have like some integration tests for all of this too, of like, hey, interacting with the main file system we're using, I would expect, you know, these things to change. So we don't have unit tests for this new unit that I'm introducing, but we do have some like some tests for some of these things in integration, which is nice as well. Um, that's good. Um, so yeah, a lot of this though too, so you see a lot of these functions, I've added a comment pointing back to the original implementation. And so a lot of these functions kind of looking at what was the business logic the third party library was trying to do here, and how can we recreate that. But with rename specifically, that was one of the buggy scenarios that I think we have to do something somewhat different. And I've already started on it. I do want to ask your all opinion on one other thing. Um, so this is all very much inspired from the original implementation of this thing. So this module is very similar. We're exporting a class which extends their locked file system thing. This is all BrowserFS stuff, which turns on locks when you're making operations or whatever. But then they have this like internal class, which is actually doing the main implementation. But this is the old school Node file system API. So everything works off of callbacks. And it just, man, it's so gnarly. I don't want to work with callbacks. So I took this pattern, and this pattern feels somewhat natural to me dealing with you know, having some experience with like languages like C++, where often like implementation and headers are like separated. So I put in a totally separate class this OverlayFS implementation class, which doesn't implement any interfaces, but just provides these promised based functions for what we need. And so then this thing that actually has to adhere to this interface, these are just proxying to the promise based implementation. Does that sound cool to you all?
It does a lot, actually.
Okay.
Like this, if this gets us away from the callbacks, this sounds, and it's a pretty clean approach in my opinion. So love it.
Cool.
Interest there ask about the TypeScript. Like, you know, I've not seen any TypeScript in our code base before, and
Yeah.
is this a first, or how's this all kind of fit in?
So I don't think this is the first. This is not the first time we use TypeScript, but one of the other more prominent places we're using TypeScript is in the VS Code extension, our official GitLab VS Code extension. VS Code is TypeScript, and we're interfacing with all these. We're interfacing with deeply with the VS Code library. It just gets so much benefit using TypeScript because these are all typed, and so that's been for this specific problem, especially because we're not. A lot of this is that I hate this term, but back of the front end thing. TypeScript has been really appropriate and helpful. So yeah, we're in TypeScript land, so it's kind of fun. Have you done TypeScript before?
Me.
Okay, yeah, well, yeah, that's where all these red lines are coming from too. Well, besides also just having errors, is sometimes these aren't. I'm not adhering to the types, which is great. So I can just get to resolve these errors. So let's see what it's like. Thanks for helping me with my work. I know that Yannick's probably like, man, CSS looks way more interesting now. I wish we were just doing CSS animations.
This is good fun.
Okay, so right now I was implementing the rename method. That before I do that, I would like to maybe I can get a feedback loop by running our test for this thing. So let me open up our test here. And maybe we can get a feedback loop going on. All right, this thing just failed because this isn't working, and that's fine. Here, when I call write file, it expected 5 arguments, but I only got 1. That's pretty yeah, that's a pretty good place to start. So let me get
using Jess to does that do your TypeScript test as well? Nice, cool.
Yeah. So let me get some context to where we're at. So rename is really interesting to how we need to implement this, because at any point we rename, we are either going to have the thing we're renaming is going to be a file or a directory. It can exist in writable or not, or it can exist in readable or not. So if it doesn't exist in readable and it just exists in writable, this is the easiest thing. And we just rename from the writables file system and we're done. If it's a file and it exists in readable, or it does exist in writable and in readable, then we could still just rename the writable one, but we do need to make sure that we've marked as deleted the readable one. And so we have internal methods for doing this where we can mark things as deleted. So that's where here we're marking as deleted the old path for the readable system. So this this thing we've handled. That's great. This one, if it doesn't exist in writable yet, and it does exist in readable, and it's a file, we need to basically create a new file in the writable system with the readable's content and stuff, and still mark it as deleted. So that's where this if condition is basically trying to implement these different paths. But marking as deleted is what needs to happen no matter what. But write file, I need more arguments because I need to also read the content. So I think I'm going to, I need to get the content from the readable file. Yeah, let me read the file, the old path, and we won't pass an encoding. There's a thing where I can say where these file flags are like how I'm opening the file. Some weird file system API stuff. This is stuff beyond my control. So I'm going to pass in the content here. I'm not going to worry about the encoding because that'll just leave us with some lossy data. Okay, and do I need a mode for this? Will it let me do it? I do need to give it a mode.
You get the mode from the original file, or?
I can, yes. And I can actually do this. So here's the other interesting thing. Since the original file system is read-only, I need to make it a writable mode, which we actually have. We have a function for, this is lovingly borrowed from the, that's lovingly borrowed from the original implementation too. Great, cool. So this, we've completed this block. The last block, which we have not completed, is that these are directories and we're renaming. That's where things get next level. But let's see if we can get our feedback loop going. That's would be great. But I'm still not able to run anything yet because here I have this open method, which I haven't implemented. I'm not entirely sure what this open method needs to do. I'm pretty sure this is going to be way easier than the rename. So if we can take a quick divergence and implement open based on what the old implementation was going to be, maybe we're good. Please stop me if I'm taking us down a really weird path.
No, sorry to sidetrack, but I just wanted to make sure it was public knowledge before I suggested it. But next week we should totally see if we can take our GitLab AI for a spin.
Yeah,
you aware of the AI assist VS Code?
Yeah, I haven't ever done.
Completion.
That would be really neat. Wow. Yeah. Is that public information?
Well, I just found a tweet about it, so it must be. It must be.
Okay.
Yeah, there's in the VS Code GitLab extension. There's configurables now for the AI assist server and API key, etc. So
nice. That's awesome.
Just thinking because clearly I'm going to offer no help here with this coding that you're doing, so maybe the computer can.
Well, no, so honestly though, is like if something isn't making sense, like that's really good feedback. I really want it's right now the strategy is so right now the task at hand is this method, which this is the old implementation, and you can see the callback stuff, and we got some switching happening. Let's try to take this old
it's definitely making sense. It's just crazy, as I say, how like what you're kind of doing is this low level kind of like, okay, I need to write a file copy command, a file read command, a file move command, a file delete, like old school reinventing the wheel, I guess, but clearly not quite.
Yeah, so a lot of the motivation here is, I mean, so one, we get so much usability wins using VS Code as our web ID, which is so sweet. Like drag and drops, right clicking, the command palette, extensions down the line, so much usability wins. On top of that, the abstraction that it requires of like reading from a file system is, and reading from a source control provider is going to be miles more reliable than what we currently have in the Web IDE. Because in the Web IDE, we've built this in-memory file system as a glorious map of path to, it's either a tree or a blob. And there's a lot of duplicated data there. And we keep track of our changes, which causes lots of weird quirks when someone like creates a new directory, renames it, and then like deletes it, but renames an old thing to there. Keeping track of those changes is a really hard problem, as opposed to calculating the change between your old and new file system.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Creating a file system in the browser is mind blowing. So it's
yeah. Thankfully, it's just implementing the API. So that's thankfully is like, I haven't had to think too hard about it.
We got cool stuff.
What'd you say? I'm freezing. Oh man.
What's the word I'm looking for? Like, you're catching up almost.
Okay.
Have we got protection for like if your browser kind of crashes or your machinery, that is there a danger of doing a lot of work in the BrowserFS and kind of losing?
Well, no. So I think what's cool is adhering to this interface. Like VS Code has a number of like internal stuff for those kind of situations. So we just kind of adhere to that interface and provide what VS Code wants, and we'll potentially get things like that out of the box. I know for sure we won't get maybe the whole file system change. We can implement that, but that level of protection. But I do know, like out of the box, it tries to recover and protect your like active file if that was open or something, which is
nice.
Which is interesting. There's still a lot of growth to be had here. So we're definitely in the first iteration phase, but there's so much promise. It is quite an enjoyable experience using it so far. But clearly we're still implementing it. So I'll try to stop selling us on it. So I'm looking at this thing, and so this open method is really interesting. So this is a method, having a little bit of context into here. This is a method that's some sort of internal BrowserFS thing is using to implement things like write file or read file. And so it's anticipating us to implement this method and return some sort of reference to a file for it to run operations on. It looks like we can, it looks like a lot of these we can just pass through to the writable file system. Except for this case where I guess I'm not sure what NOP is, but I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to think. I don't know. I'm not going to think about it because I really just need to copy this thing kind of over. So I'm actually, for better or for worse, that's what we're trying to do. I'm going to copy this over, literally. Let's see if we can implement it. All right, so I can call stat on this. There we go. Great, I get my stat. If we actually, so the way these callbacks work is if this thing is falsy, then we end up in this land. So we can handle this situation first. And this thing will be falsy if there's an error, actually. So we end up here and all right, we caught some sort of error. Oh, we're not async. Couldn't stat path. Then I guess we do this, the old switcheroo. No idea what action type is, but let's import it. Sweet. We have a helper for this. This is doing make dir p. On the writable. Yes, it's got to be on the writable. And we can get the dir name of the path. Cool. So I'll await that. Can you await inside a switch? Certainly can, right? Certainly we can.
Don't see a reason why not.
Should I even be doing a switch here? We just have two. I probably shouldn't even be doing a switch.
So something's gone wrong, and you're now trying to do what exactly?
So
are you saying if the reason it went wrong was because the path doesn't exist, then okay.
Yes.
Should we not check that first rather than failing and then?
We can do that.
I don't, I'm just asking because normally, right, your catch is a bit more for I don't know what's gone wrong. Whereas if you're expecting a path,
yeah, I think it's great. So we can do if I don't know what path not exists. This is where I don't have to know everything though. That's okay. So yeah, I think we can just check if it exists rather than relying on the throw. Sometimes one thing I do notice with these things is they'll rely on the throws, so you're not making so many operations.
Yeah.
It's one reason.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, because the check is actually an additional operation, whereas if you just let it throw and then but yeah, I can understand that.
I think it's probably better not to optimize too early. So I'm fine with. So then I can just return. Yeah, we can just return, I guess. Writable open. There's no callbacks. Yay. Great. So then if we're not creating a file, oh wait, but this is if it not exists. Ha 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 ha. Yep. That's how bugs get introduced. If it doesn't exist and we're not creating a file, then I'm going to throw API error and then P. So that came from this whole catch block we just copied over. Now we don't need that. That's great. Good call. Yes. Hey, you said you weren't going to be helpful. What are you doing? Being helpful.
I might invest in a rubber duck costume for future sessions.
I'm sure you can expense that.
Okay, so then it does look like we do some sort of switcheroo. Which I'll just copy over here. I mean, how do you guys feel about keeping the switch here? Do we like being switchy?
I very rarely use them, but I don't know whether that's a bad thing or. I
mean, generally, I mean, the thing is, it requires you either have to break or return, or you're going to run into weird issues. Hopefully, whatever linter we have is kind of catching that. But otherwise, it's cool to see. I don't know, but then also like variable declarations inside of these can. I don't think variable declarations are scoped within a case. I think they kind of can pollute the whole block as well. I'm gonna transform it to an if, because this is a lot of body for.
I'm more of an if guy.
I was about to say, me neither. I'm not a switch guy either, but there's so many switches in this code base going on that it kind of feels consistent. But probably okay to introduce an if.
We already moved to ifs over here, so maybe we're okay. But that, yeah, keeping consistent is a good point too. That's not how we do anything. Oh my gosh. But let's try it with let's try it with this. So if that, else if no. So that's the thing. It's enum 0. Else we throw an error that it does exist. Okay. Row. I'll just copy this one. I'll tell you what though, like this is my favorite kind of thing. I love doing this, like this isn't low level, but I love how much this isn't touching the DOM.
What did you do today? Not touch the DOM. Anyway.
Yes, that's, man, you're doing good things. Just don't show things to users. Don't listen to the users. That's a really messy world out there. Don't want to do it. Cool. So if we're here, I'm not sure what this is, but once for some reason we're doing the make dir-p thing again. Now let's just double check that's what's happening here. So if I jump to dir name stat, create parents. Yes, this is doing make dir-p. So we can just do that. Make the derp. Oh, I need to pass in I have a file system. Okay. And then it looks like we just open this thing then. Great. And I can just return that. Oh, this is way easier than that. Look at how much noise callbacks cause. It's so much smaller. Okay, man, so much smaller.
I have this issue working with Android and Java, and I haven't mastered it yet, but from what I understand, like network activity has to be done in background threads with callbacks, and yeah, it makes me curl up in a ball. And
no, correct me if I'm wrong, Java has like a async await pattern, because they do have futures or something like that.
So I'm not expert enough as I'd like to be, and the stuff that I've been working on in the past is quite dated. So like running on Android 4, 5, that kind of thing. So quite old versions of Java, and doesn't support like Xamarin or Kotlin or all the things that would make my life a lot easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, doing a real quick Google, it doesn't seem like Java has anything related. C# does do have it.
C# is really nice. Yeah.
I miss it a little bit.
You miss it a little bit. I'm sure you do.
Just a little bit.
Oh, I'm sure you do, with all the type safety and like, oh, compared to Ruby. I'm sorry. I didn't put that together, but yeah, that's a change, Lee.
But then there's other like awesomeness about being able to like dynamically create methods and all kind of weird and wonderful stuff. But
there's no such thing as like the C# console, is there, where you can just like the Rails console? Is there?
Not really. I remember back in the day, because I've kind of evolved through Microsoft languages, like the original like Visual Basic 6, I think it got up to, before it then went to Visual Basic .NET, and then you kind of had your C# and VB, different sort of flavors, I guess, if that's the right term. And you used to have the immediate window, and the immediate window you could do that kind of browse console.
Okay.
Right.
I am somewhat familiar with that from doing like VBA for Excel.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's how I actually got started programming, Paul. Like,
that's how I got started.
That's like coding was VBA. Actually, no, that's not true. I did basic, like Quick Basic and BBC Basic, but yeah, like Windowsy type programming was very much via. Yeah,
that's funny.
Nice nostalgia. Got a love it.
So it looks like we don't actually use the stats until like here. So I can actually just move this over to here, which is great. That's not how you write code, is it? That's not code. Yeah, that wasn't code. And then, okay. Yes. So we can just, yeah, they're doing something weird. I'm just gonna do readable.stat. Why are you so necessary. Oh my gosh, why did is that a okay. All right. Guess it likes it to look like this. All right, we're getting really close.
I hope you're going to be able to show us something at the end, or is it going to be green tests? Is that what we're?
If it well, this thing with TypeScript, if it compiles, that means you're good, right? I'm joking. We're just trying to get it to compile right now. That's a different problem to solve. No, this hopefully we'll get some green tests and some failing tests, but this is wildly helpful for me already. So I really appreciate your all help right now. So that's great. Okay, it looks like they're doing something to update its size. So stats.size. How interesting. I guess -1. Then they're going to update the size. And look at, see, this is also an issue with their callback approach. Like, look how many of these like exclamation marks they had to add. This is like telling TypeScript, forget the fact that this thing can be nullable. Just trust me, I know it's not. And you'd want to always avoid anything like that in TypeScript. But with callbacks, it's tough because it really could be, and it doesn't always know that in advance. So rewriting it in this promise-based approach is so much nicer because we could be assured this is it, it's this, or it rejected, and we get all of that handling for free. Link. Okay, we're just following the thing here. And then they have this thing called the overlay file. So that's the one weird thing. Let's see if we can find, that's got to be, okay. So they just created this thing called an overlay file, which implements their file interface. So I'm thinking I'm just going to create a new class for this. What do you think? Do we like to
have a better idea?
Do we like to have multiple classes in the same thing?
What does this overlay file? What does it give us?
I don't know. I'm just following from the I'm just following orders, man. Yeah, what is this doing? What is preload file?
He's starting to fall down a rabbit.
It looks like it's expecting uh-oh. I might be in a sticky situation. Because it's passing this along to this inner class. And this has to implement file system, which is all the callback stuff, which I have tried to blissfully ignore.
I guess we're going to have to rework the implementation then to not rely on it.
Yeah, or when I create my implementation, maybe I could pass in file factory this. Like, because this thing implements the file system. And so maybe I can just create some sort of file factory from this overlay file thing. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
You might have to expand on that a little bit.
So what I'm thinking is I cannot, oh my gosh, no, everything is red. What happened? I broke something really badly. I lost my place too. Oh, it's because I'm losing things. Let me get rid of all this stuff. Or yeah, let me just. All right, this is the last bit of this method that I need to implement. Let me delete this stuff. Okay. So instead of creating the new file thing here, maybe as a, oh, it's upset because it doesn't want the ifs. Sorry. Maybe this class, which is my implementation class, can receive in its constructor a factory for something like a file. Because the situation is at this level, I don't have anything that implements BrowserFS's file system because I'm trying to just deal with promises right now. And I wanted to just take interfacing with that file system bit. I wanted to encapsulate that as one problem, and implementing this with promises is one problem. And so but the situation is this API is expecting some sort of file reference. For us to get the right implementation for this, it looks like we need something that implements file and extends this preload file, and preload file is expecting something that implements file system with the callback style. So you see all these callbacks here. So I think we can do that. I think we can still do that. But what I'm suggesting is that this instead just does something like yeah, something like this, and then create overlay file actually comes from here so that I can keep a reference to this. Does that make sense at all? I'm not explaining it well. I'm sorry.
I think it's just like I realize that you're trying to just kind of recreate, just what's the word? Adapt, migrate, whatever the term is, but I struggle without the context. Like I say, I don't really know what the purpose of overlay file. What is an overlay file? What is a preload file? What is a so?
I struggle with that context too. So I'm also like trying not. Here is porting this third-party module over.
And I've done something like this before where I thought that I only needed to take like a few pieces across, and I brought a few pieces and I was like, that's got a reference to this and that's got a reference to these two things. And before I knew it, I was rewriting the entire thing, which I didn't really intend to do, but I'm not sure how far down the rabbit hole you're intending or prepared or expecting to go.
Yeah, so I think oh gosh, this has done a really poor job on something. We're just gonna put file system here. Because it doesn't need to be like that. Sync ace. Oh, why did it do that? That was interesting. Sync, that's an interesting function. So yes, I agree. This is the very end, so I'm not concerned about this unraveling too much where I'm porting all sorts of stuff over. I know where this fits as far as the architecture goes of BrowserFS. This is just this one module that implements these interfaces and stuff. So I want to just, instead of using their module, which had some issues, we're going to do this ourselves, which isn't, is less than ideal, but it's just the situation we're in. And thankfully, we can have tests for this thing, and now we have a little bit more control over it and stuff like that. But yeah, there's some quirky things. There's some quirky things that, like, for instance, I just ran into this situation with file needing a reference to file system. But I think I can still get around by keeping the implementation pretty free from all of those dependencies. And I can, so what I'm going to need though is I'm going to have some sort of function where I can create overlay file. Is going to be a function that takes in where is it? Where is here? Yeah, that takes in like all this stuff. Oops. So this is what I was thinking I was going to need to do, and then returns a file. Great. Path, stats, yes.
The good thing is that through this, I've seen that definitely I fully appreciate why you're not looking to push anything upstream, because you're not tweaking a few things. You're taking a completely different approach, by doing away with these callbacks. So I think that it might lend itself well to this being abstracted to its own sort of module or package or something in the future. Because then other people can more easily sort of benefit, leverage, and contribute again upstream to this without it being like tied specifically to the GitLab project.
100%. And so that's also one of the approaches we take with this project too, is these are the different things that make this all work are sub packages.
Awesome.
This is all in its own package, which is going to be really powerful because we could reuse the same file system that would run the Web IDE is the same file system that could run snippets or any other kind of in browser file system editing experience. We could reuse these things as well, which would be really great.
So will it become like anything like an NPM package, or is it still kind of
It could be.
part of?
Right now, it is all bundled in and baked in, but we can have multiple packages deploying from this repository for sure. And
Cool.
that was one of the intentions too of here, this package doesn't depend on really anything else. And that's intentional.
Nice. Yeah.
Because what's really gnarly in the Web IDE is you have dependencies from random places all over the place and circular dependencies, and it just makes reusing that thing, let alone comprehending that thing, really difficult.
No,
But
that's
I
awesome.
think I did not do a good job. I did not do a good job promoting the comprehension of this piece today. But part of that is because the task at hand is just moving over this module from the third party, and I myself have just kind of chosen like there's a lot here that we don't need to control because we just need to implement this interface. And so I'm not really thinking about details too much, except for the operations like rename are buggy, and we did have to readdress that. But this has been super helpful for me, so I appreciate let me share this this gnarly task with you all, and I hope that was fun.
That's awesome. Do you have a few minutes to either on the recording or outside of the recording, if you prefer, to let us know sort of how this is going and timelines and other, like when we might get exciting sneak peeks, etc.?
Yeah, it's coming, man. So like the deadline is deadline. I know we don't really have deadlines, but we are I'm heads down focused on this entirely. And so the goal is long-term goal that we're really shooting for. And I think this is communicated in an issue, but pretty soon.
Otherwise you'll crop it out, right?
I know. Well, I don't know, maybe. But the next like GitLab major breaking change, we're hoping to remove the old Web IDE, and this will be the new one. So long term, that's it. But we're really hoping to turn on the feature flag on .com really soon. So that'd be.
So is the next major break in 16, or you have to announce it in 16 to then take it out in 17? Or
no, I think it would be 16. I think that's the goal. But that's,
well, I can't imagine anyone being overly attached to our Web IDE. It provides awesome functionality, but I think when you compare it to VS Code, it's in another league, right?
Yeah. So right now, like the project, and this has been around for a while, but so we haven't integrated in the main repo. We obviously have the feature flag off, but if you wanted to locally turn on VS Code Web IDE feature flag, you would see it. But this is a standalone repository, which has been really powerful because it lets us make, because this is really a standalone application that integrates with GitLab. So right now I'm in our project's pages website, and these are like the parameters that really just kick off the Web IDE. Is like, hey, what's your project path and ref? And there you go.
Yeah.
So
and so anyone can hit this, and
yes, anyone can see this right now. And so we have a nice little modal saying that.
Nice.
But we loaded up the file system. This is using the third-party OverlayFS, which I'm now re-implementing. Thankfully, there's like integration tests for this stuff, so I feel a level of like security with that.
So I know you always say that no effort's wasted effort, but so did we try to work with the callbacks and eventually got to a point where it's proving so challenging that?
Yeah, so here's the situation is like, but man, no, so much works out of the box so nicely. Like even loading images was like, knowing the history of the Web IDE, like this was a situation of like, how do you tell what's a binary file and what's not? Like, don't have to worry about any of that stuff. It's working really nicely. The one thing, so I have an MR open to register the source control. Because when we have a separation between readable and writable file systems, That's great. That gives us a deterministic set of things you touched, which we can easily calculate what's actually changed. The situation with the OverlayFS was a surprise, but what has happened is if you're doing something like a directory rename, it wasn't working. And then when I fixed that, if I did a directory rename back, that wasn't working. And I'm glad to have discovered that. And thankfully, it's just an implementation pivot. It's not like a big architectural pivot, but we just have to, when I dug into why it wasn't working, it was clear to me, yeah, this is why you don't write callback hell code, because there's bugs. Like we called the callback multiple times accidentally, and like that wasn't our code, that's the third party. So it's like, all right, we need to, I don't feel optimistic about this module, so we're gonna try to do it ourselves, because it's not, that algorithm is like, that's all it's doing, and there's a lot of operations that are really trivial. Rename is the most non-trivial operation, and open was kind of weird that we just did together, but yeah, so trying to fix this file operation, was not expecting on needing to do that, but that's where we're at. And then, but it's, I feel
It's awesome. Thanks for sharing, Paul.
yeah, it's gonna be really exciting. We're gonna have more like GitLab branding integrated into it as well. So that's part of the task. So me and Enrique, like Chad, Himanshu, and Tomas on the editor team, we're all pretty focused on it. So
wicked. Keep up the good work.
Forward to have that.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Yeah. Thanks for letting me share a little bit of the internals with you today.
No worries. Have a great day, and Janik, have a great evening.
I'll catch you all later.
Later.
Bye.
See you soon. Have a good one.